Hi everyone. Thanks for joining today's session. My name is Simar and I'll be taking the session today. And the topic of the session is mastering product sense for PM interviews. So I think just to give you a context of what this is about, no matter which company you're interviewing for PMs and which, let's say, ladder you're joining at, one of the most important crafts of PMs will be product sense, and you'll always be sort of judged on this skill set or this craft. So I think mastering this becomes sort of quite important for any kind of PM interviews which is there in any of the leading tech companies. So we'll go a bit deeper into how can you sort of go more deeper into your craft of mastering product sense. Before we go a bit deeper, just a quick bit of introduction about myself. My name is Simar. I was a PM in Paytm, which is a big payments player in Indian ecosystem. And post that, I went a bit deeper into craft of payments. And after that, I joined Booking.com. Currently, I'm a PM at Booking.com in the payments BU, and I'm building a wallet product for a global wallet product for our customers. So that's it about me. A bit of the agenda for today. So first, I think we'll talk about what actually is product sense. Do we need product sense for PM interviews? What are the interviews looking for when they talk about product sense? And then we will go a bit deeper into the kind of questions you can expect in these kind of interviews. We will take one real case problem statement and sort of go a bit deeper into that on how do we solve that, and then sort of derive that what how you can expand this approach to other kind of problems. And then we will sort of have some kind of takeaways and we'll wrap up and ask if you have any kind of questions. I can take that questions as well. Make sense? So before even we go deeper into how can we even approach product sense interviews, I think I'm going to talk a bit about what product sense actually is, right? So if it's basically sort of like your product judgment or product intuition, and the way you look at products which are built and infer things out of that. So if you have ever sort of looked at an app and wondered why that product decision was ever made, and then you're able to crack that and understand what was the decision making behind that product decision which was made, I think this is basically your product judgment or product sense. So imagine Snapchat introduced filters. Why did that happen? Facebook keeps on, insisting you on reminding you of your friends' birthdays. Why do Facebook keeps doing that? How does it connect well with the mission? What is that product doing with the customer? How is that helping with the decision of going towards the right mission of the product? And then when you talk about, let's say, LinkedIn has a product called, professionals like you. Why does LinkedIn have that, and what impact does it have? So I think if you have thought about these kind of questions and try to answer that, it's basically developing on your craft of product sense, right? So I think if you have ever been worked as a PM or handled PM interviews or taken PM interviews in your past, I think you have been exposed. You might have been exposed to questions like, how you would design an efficient walking directions app. How do you get the landlords get the properties reviewed? How do you design an Uber for X? How do you design an ATM for blind, etc., etc.? Multitude of questions like this. All these questions fall under a big broad category or a bucket of product sense, right? So I think you've gotten a slight idea of what product sense is. If you go a bit deeper, product sense is about your ability to grasp a abstract and a big problem which is not well defined, which is not well understood, which is not well formulated, and your ability to synthesize that problem in clear terms. Who is this problem for? What is this overall ecosystem interaction at play? What is that missing benefit that no one has solved for? What problem are you even targeting? So the more abstract and unknown this space or this problem is, the more your product sense or craft comes at play. In this case, you might be even the person who is sort of defining a new segment or defining a new industry, defining a new business model. So hence this craft becomes more and more important. Make sense? The second thing is that once you understand that abstract and big picture problem, the equal ability to break down that identified problem into digestible chunks and actually building sort of a productionizable solution, right? So Even if you have understood the problem, you need to define, you need to break down that problem, you need to prioritize that which piece of the puzzle comes first, so that you can build something shippable for the consumers for which you're solving the problem for. This is sometimes also called market fitting. Last but not the least, I think once you have defined the strategy, defined the market, defined what your customers are, the problems are, etc., etc., you need to build something shippable to solve that problem and make sure that that can be scaled up. So I think this um, overall encapsulates what product sense is and what basically we are looking for when we talk about product sense. The next interesting question is that, okay, fine, this is what product sense is. Then why do even, they ask questions related to product sense in the PM interviews, and why do even a lot of big tech companies care about this craft? So I think the answer is very clear, because when you work as a PM, you're exposed to such similar problems when you're solving for them, right? So we really, really deeply care about your deep understanding of the goals of a product, both for the business and for the consumer. Let's say you're a PM for Google Maps, you need to really understand that when you're solving a problem, which customer you're solving for. Do you deeply understand the goals of the product, and do you deeply understand even the mission of the parent company, let's say Google, when you're actually solving the problem for Google Maps, right? And then how well you constantly evaluate whether that product is serving those goals which we have been defined in the beginning, whether you are actually connecting those goals with the uber mission of the company. After that, I think one of the things which also you do as a PM in your daily life is that you prioritize the most impactful problems to solve and the most impactful ideas to build upon. So I think this is something also which encapsulates in the product sense. And after that, once you have prioritized and identified the right problems to build, you need to constantly find the opportunities to better serve those goals. So I think based on this, it becomes super critical and really, really important that we find the candidates with right product sense, so that we can actually go about solving the right products and identifying the right opportunities. Make sense? Now, I think once we have identified and understood what product sense is and why do even interviewers care about product sense, the next thing which becomes important is that what kind of questions do we expect in the actual product sense interviews? Firstly, I think all major companies which will you will interview, let's say Uber, Google, Facebook, in one form or the other, these kind of rounds will happen for sure. And no matter which designation you join, even if you join at a director or a VP level, this will be there. This craft will always be judged on from PM to SPM to GPM to director, etc., etc. So I think that becomes really, really important to sort of master this craft. Going deeper into the kind of questions you expect, what I have seen is that there are, let's say, first kind of questions, which is, let's say, designing a new product. So this becomes like a product from scratch kind of questions. So you can define a new product in digital space. So for example, you can define build something in the sports space, or build something in the music space, or for Facebook or for Google, or build something in the, let's say, build a library, build a digital library. So these kind of questions are there, which are sort of defining or designing a new product or building a new product in the digital space. And also there can be product in the physical space. Let's say you have to make an alarm for the blind, ATM for the blind, or design a car dashboard. These kind of questions are there. The approach remains quite similar, but these are there in the physical space, not in the digital space. Whereas I'm saying that build something or design something for Facebook sports, this is something in the digital space. So I think these kind of distinction exists in the designing a new product kind of questions. And then there are other kind of questions which are there, which is sort of improvement of an existing product. So let's say the kind of questions you can expect there is improve Google Maps, improve Uber, improve, let's say, WhatsApp. How would you monetize WhatsApp? How would you improve the acquisition of Facebook? Things like this. So I think these are also product sense questions, but these are not building or designing a new product from scratch. Rather, these are the questions which would focus on an existing product which you might be familiar with, And then you have to build upon that and actually go from there. The third kind of questions, which are also quite interesting, is that these are the questions related to your favorite product. So I think typically what happens is that you have to, tell your favorite product, and then they go sort of deeper and deeper into that. And then actually this becomes like, from the favorite product, why is it the favorite product, and then sort of go into improving a specific aspect of your favorite product. So I think two and three are kind of linked but slightly different. And the fourth kind of questions are, in my opinion, the trickiest one, and probably it's not that often asked, but still it can be asked in these interviews or product sense. It's related to product strategy. Basically, these won't judge the aspect of building a product or designing a product. This will be more of a strategy questions. And the example of such strategy questions would be, what should Facebook Oculus do next? Something like this. I think this is a combination of designing plus strategy, but more or less it's focused more on strategy and less on designing, right? So these are also the questions which you might be asked in your product sense interviews. So broadly, I think if you cover these four categories of questions, I think you should be good to go for your product sense interviews. But there can be sort of new categories evolving, but in my opinion these are the four which are broadly there. So new product can be digital or physical, improvement of an existing product like improve Facebook, WhatsApp, etc. Tell your favorite product and improve some aspects. You can go deeper and they can ask some cross questions related to that. Can be your favorite product, and then product strategy questions. Like I said, what google should Google enter into video streaming space, something like this can also be a product strategy question. Then the next product strategy question could be, let's say, what should Oculus do next, like things like this. um, yeah, I think so. The next thing is that we will sort of jump upon a real case problem statement. So we will take an actual question which was asked in a Facebook interview, and then we will see that how we can solve it with the approach we have, and then we will also take some of the key takeaways from how we can solve this problem. Cool. So let's say your problem statement is that how would you design something for Facebook sports? Okay, take some time. Um, think about how would you go about solving this question, and then within a couple of minutes, I'm gonna go about how would I go about solving this question. And this is the problem statement. That's it. This is the one-liner problem statement, that how do you design something for Facebook sports? Cool. I think so. By now, you would have gotten some idea of how you approach this question, etc., and how to go about it. I'm going to tell you what not to do in this case. Typically, what candidates do, and they straight away get rejected in these kind of situations, is that you've been asked a question that how do you design something for FB Sports, and what they do is that they straight away jump to solutions, which is a total no-no. If you do this, I think it's going to be not well. You're not going to be perceived as a good PM candidate, and your product sense interview is going to get screwed up a bit. So what people do is that they come up with answers like, hey, you know what, we can build like a sports streaming application for Facebook. We can build events product for Facebook where you can see the sports, you can see live scores, etc., etc. No, total no. You don't have to go like this, because firstly, you have to understand the problem statement and understand the space first of all before going into the solutions. Okay. All right, so I think we need to first start when you have been given an abstract problem statement like this, which is sports. Sports as a category is huge, right? You can even not imagine the horizontal things which can come into sports. Something like you can watch sports, you can play sports, you can stream sports, you can get live score updates of sports. You can do n number of things. Firstly, and first you need to define that, does it even make sense for Facebook to do something related to sports, right? So I think you need to answer and ask these questions from the interviewer, and then even go thinking about the actual, building the process and actual thinking of the solutions. All right, so firstly, take it slow, don't jump to solutions. This is understanding of how you can break down the problem, how you can tear the space, and then you can go deeper, 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 and then you can build something which is shippable. Okay, makes sense. So the first thing is that you need to ask some kind of clarification questions to your interviewer. You have been asked to build something for sports. You can ask clarifications questions, something like, hey, which market is it for? Are we building for India? Are we building for the US? Are we building for Europe? Do we have some specific market in mind, or is it a global app? um, the other clarification questions would be that, is it for only the core main Facebook app, or is it for all the properties of Facebook, let's say WhatsApp, Instagram, etc., etc. And the third interesting clarification question here, which I could think of, is that, does the interviewer want you to focus on some specific demographics? For example, maybe he wants to build something for women, a sports app for only women, or a sports app only for players which are already, let's say, sports enthusiasts, something like this, or for some specific age group they want to focus. Maybe they want to build FB sports app for kids. So these could be the clarification questions you can ask your interviewer. If they have something in mind, they will always tell you to focus on some specific thing, or they can also tell you to choose among the different things you have listed on based on your assumptions. So here, what you would do is that you would pick something so that your solution is narrowed, but you also need to give some rationales and defend it perfectly well. So let's say um, you ask the question to your interviewer that, which market are we building this sports product for Facebook? And let's say your interviewer says that, hey, you know what, I don't have any specific market in mind, you can choose a market. So let's say me as a candidate would say, you know what, I would build something for the Indian market. And the next question would be, why did you choose the Indian market over the US market? Or why did you not build a global product at first and then go for localization? My answer to that would be, let's say, and my defend, you have to defend your rationales at each step. This is also something very critical at product sense interviews, that once you pick something, you have to defend your rationale, that why you are choosing or making that decision, why not US market over European market. So let's say one of the rationales for me could be that, one, India as a market is huge, it's quite untapped, the internet penetration is growing, so there is a huge opportunity to be served. And also, with respect to the sports space, there is, let's say, no uh, common or a big player which is dominating the sports space. So there is a huge opportunity for Facebook to enter. So I think this could be something which is quite interesting. Hence, I'm choosing the Indian market over the US market, right? So I think the way you defend your rationales will matter a lot in product science interviews. Let's say the core Facebook app or all properties. This is also clarification questions. Most probably here also your interview will say that you choose whether it has to be Instagram, or whether it has to be Facebook, or whether it has to be WhatsApp also. So here also my rationale would be that, let's focus initially for the MVP only Facebook. Let's see how it goes, and if it works, then we can think of expanding it to Instagram or other properties. I think WhatsApp is, it's a core chat application, so I don't think sports and WhatsApp go together really well. So I don't think it should focus on WhatsApp because it doesn't connect well with the mission. So I think it should focus on core Facebook app, which is your blue Facebook app, and not Instagram, etc., etc. In terms of the demographics, I think we have chosen Indian market, but we won't narrow down at this point whether we want to focus on specific age or some specific segment, etc. Make sense? So I think, digest this point, that before even going deeper into any kind of solutions or jumping into any kind of thing which you want to go, take your time, you have to be calm, you have to understand, ask questions. It has to be a lot of back and forth between you and the interviewer, and then understand that where he wants to take you also. Maybe interviewer has some specific preference in mind, and then they will steer your answer to some specific direction. Maybe at this point also he will ask you to let's say build something for a sports app for kids, then your approach will completely change, and you would not build something which will build right now for the general market. Make sense? So after you have asked these clarification questions and you have understood that the direction you want to take, I think the next thing is to define the goal. What I mean by define the goal is that you need to understand that, firstly, why sports for Facebook? Is it a space even which Facebook should consider? What is sports? Does it even connect with the mission of the Facebook? And then if you talk about sports, then it could be a lot of things, right? It could be watching, playing, gaming, updates, etc., etc. Now you cannot solve for everything as a PM. You need to pick and narrow your focus. Once you narrow your focus, you need to then define your goal. And this is basically, this step what we are doing is completely strategy. This is the product strategy part, where based on, you're going horizontal on, let's say sports as a category is there, you're going horizontal with respect to sports as a category, and then picking one direction and then going deeper into one direction. Make sense? So I think the first thing is, what is sports? So if I think about it, sports is something which has gotten people together from ages, no matter what your ethnicity, no matter what your religion, race, etc., etc. When it comes to sports, especially in market like India, and when we talk about sports, the first thing which comes to our mind is cricket, right? So when we talk about sports, I've seen that people come together irrespective of their differences, race, etc., etc., and it connects a lot people well. And if you think about the mission of Facebook, the mission of Facebook is to help give the tools to people to build communities and bring them closer together. So if you think about something which is bringing people closer together, if you think about the mission of Facebook, I think it connects really, really well. So building something for sports can be super interesting value proposition for the customers of Facebook. So I think yes, doing something in the sports space can be really interesting. So the next thing is, hey, you know what, we have defined sports as a space is interesting for Facebook. Now what do we build something where some kind of, do we solve for, like, we go into the space of streaming, we solve for playing sports, we solve for online gaming, we solve for match updates, etc., etc. What should we actually do? So I think here you need to consider two things. One, these horizontals you are choosing should connect really well with the mission of Facebook, and the second thing which you need to consider is that whether in terms of competition you have an upper hand here or not. Maybe you want to build something for, let's say, watching or streaming sports. But if I consider Indian market, there is something called Hotstar, and Hotstar is already there in that space of live score updates and watching sports, etc. So maybe even if Facebook goes into that space, maybe it connects well with the mission of Facebook, but maybe that space is already saturated, and that space might not be even big enough for as an interesting value proposition for Facebook. And also, when we talk about watching sports, I think watching sports is, if you think about it, it's let's say a isolated experience. You watch your sports online at your house, someone else watches sports at online at their house, etc. It's an isolated experience. So I think it's not something which brings people closer together, and it's already a solved space. So I don't think it makes sense for Facebook to go into the streaming space. Whereas if you think about gaming is already there in Facebook. Facebook already has a Facebook gaming product. So I think this also is an not so interesting value proposition considering the competition and considering the space. So I think if you think about playing sports, this is quite an interesting category, because one, because of circumstances which are there in today's world, people are isolated because of lockdown and COVID, etc. People have lost their jobs, so it's also affecting their mental health, physical health, since they have been trapped in their home from quite some months. And also, playing sports brings people closer together physically and also virtually. And this is something which has not been solved either by Facebook or some other network, where they're actually motivating the people to play sports together. So I think, in my opinion, you can give the rationale that this is something which A, connects really, really super well with the mission of Facebook, and second, it is not a solved problem and not a solved space. So I think if I have to pick one space to go deeper into, I would pick um, playing sports, right? So now, out of sports as a whole abstract category, you have narrowed down that you want to solve for playing sports. Now, now the thing is that since you have entered this space, you need to define your goal, and your goal has to be super well connected with the mission of Facebook, right? So I think you can define some goal which is like energetic, breathable. So I think your if I have to pick one goal which is something related to playing sports, so my goal as a Facebook PM would be um, something like help people, connect people with who want to play sports and bring them closer together, right? So this can be my goal, which is sort of connects well with the mission of Facebook. And then it is sort of fun also. Your goal doesn't have to be boring, because once you personalize your goals, then it sort of becomes more fun and more interactive with the mission of the Facebook, and it connects well with the interviewers as well in general. So make your goal fun and make your goal based on the prioritization you have done at this point. So I think here, once you have defined your goal, that your goal is to connect people who want to play sports, um, you're basically defined the strategic direction you want to take, right? Once you have defined the strategic direction you want to take with respect to playing sports, the next step is that you need to define that who you want to build for. And what I mean by who you want to build for, that means you want to pick some kind of segmentation in this space, and then you want to go deeper into this kind of like who exactly, like which segment you want to build for, because playing sports also is a huge category. And when you think about playing sports and the segments, the needs would vary a lot with respect to different segments, let's say for moms and kids, etc., etc. So I think we need to go deeper and define the segments first and then pick one, right? So once you've gone into this step of segments, if I have to think about, hey, you know what, in this category of, let's say, playing sports, what are the segments which are existing? So I think the first kind of category which comes to my mind are sort of, let's say, sports freaks. These are the people who are already actively engaged in sports in some way. Let's say they are they are already players, or already like professional kind of people who are already playing sports as a livelihood. So these are the people who are playing sports, let's say, once a day, or at least once in 2 days, etc., etc. So they already have a quite high frequency of playing sports with respect to the current scenario. The second kind of, so this is one extreme, right, where people are actually playing sports very actively. And then the other extreme ones, you can think, if you think about it, are the people who are not engaged in sports at all. So let's call them like couch potatoes. And couch potatoes are the people who don't play sports at all, because of, and this can be because of many reasons, like they don't want to play, they don't have a partner to play, they don't know what to play, etc., etc. So couch potatoes are different. And maybe it could also be that they want to play but they're not able to play because of constraints which are due to society. For example, consider consider a woman in a society in which their parents and their neighbors don't allow them to go outside and play. So I think this could also be something which is there, which probably be unnoticed, but these are also come in the category of couch potatoes, where people are not playing sports actively at all. Like let's say their frequency can be even playing sports less than a month, or less than a couple of months, so they are not playing at all. And I think if you think about two kind of these extremes, there is one more category which comes sort of in the middle. So these, let's say, we can call them, if I have to name them, we can call them sports enthusiasts. What I mean by enthusiast is they want to play, they are interested, but due to some reason they are lacking that motivation, right? So they but they don't have any constraints to play, right? They need some kind of a motivation or push. And if by any means we are able to provide them some kind of a motivation or push, I think for sure they're going to get engaged in playing sports, right? So these are broad three kind of segments I've defined. Once, and one thing to consider is that once you define segments, always apply that MECE kind of approach, that these segments should be mutually exclusive. That means there are no overlaps in these segments, more or less, and collectively exhaustive, right? What I mean by collectively exhaustive is that once you consider these three segments that covers the whole universe. Now a lot of people have this confusion that why have I chosen the segregation of the segments based on their interest and not their age, not their city, etc., etc. You can do anything. There is no thumb rule to that, that you have to do segmentation basis on that. You can do segmentation basis on age also. The only thing is that you need to consider, if you're doing segmentation on the basis of age, your needs should vary, right? So in my opinion, this segmentation was quite clean in terms of the varying needs, hence I've done this. But even if you do on the basis of age, or even if you do on the basis of their demographics, their gender, etc., etc., it's fine. The only thing is that you need to be you need to be able to well define what your segmentation is, and well define that their needs are different. That's it. This is the golden rule, right? And always apply mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive kind of framework if you want. um, After that, once you have defined your segments, you have defined your goal, that you want to connect people who want to play sports. You cannot, as a PM, initially solve for everyone. You cannot solve for sports freaks, which are like professional players and couch potatoes at the same time, or sports enthusiasts. So you need to pick one segment and prioritize. This is also one of the important skills which PM interviews are judging candidates on, that how well you defend your rationales and how you prioritize and make decisions, because decision making is also one of the important crafts of a PM. So I think here, once you have to prioritize one segment, you have to choose factors that on what basis you are prioritizing on. And what I think is, how you can prioritize your segment are on the basis of two factors. One, how big that segment is. Let's say if sports enthusiasts, or let's say sports freaks as a segment is quite small, let's say we are only talking about professional players, which will be quite less, then is it even worth to go solve for those kind of segment? That's one. And also you need to consider that maybe the segment is too big, but maybe that segment need is too small. Then also you have a problem, right? So you need to consider both these factors, that your segment should be big enough to go even worth solving for. And the second thing which you need to consider is that whether the need with respect to that goal of that segment is even big enough or worth it to solve for. So if I have to pick one out of these three segments, if I'll sort of eliminate my segments or prioritize one on the basis of these two factors. So let's say sports freaks, right? So we are talking about professional players, and let's say who are actively playing sports. So I think that this segment is quite small, and their need is also quite small, because the thing is that if someone is actively engaging in sports on a daily, day-to-day basis, I don't think they even have a need of playing sports with one another, because they have a defined schedule, they have friends to play with, they have sports equipment, etc., etc. So I think these kind of players, this kind of segment is quite solved already, or they're served already. So I think I would eliminate this segment first of all. Then you need to choose between sports enthusiasts who can play if given a slight push, and couch potatoes. Couch potatoes are the one who don't play at all. So I think the people who don't play at all or don't engage in sports at all, this is quite a tough segment to solve for, because they might not be even playing because of societal constraints. Just like I gave you an example, a lady who is pregnant who cannot play sports, or a lady who is, or a girl who is, let's say, living in some part of the world where she is not allowed to play, or maybe a person with a disability who is not allowed to play. So I don't think we should solve for this segment, because it's not a soft spot. Building custom solutions for them would be quite hard. So I think our biggest opportunity lies in the area of sports enthusiast, where the segment is quite big and the need of the segment is quite big. And here, if we solve, we need to give them a push or a motivation, and then I think we can convert them into active playing category. So basically, what we need to do is, with respect to solving this product, we need to convert sports enthusiast to maybe in some category of sports freaks, where they are actively, their frequency of playing is improved, and they sort of connect well with each other with respect to playing sports. So I think if you, so my thing is that based on prioritization, I would pick sports enthusiast as my category. And here, if you go a bit deeper, let's say you will find some kind of working professionals or some kind of moms who want to play, school students who want to play in these kind of personas. So once you have defined your segment, always personalize your segment more and more if you want to make your answer more solid. So I would personalize my sports enthusiast segment as, let's say, you know what, in Indian market, let's say I would consider Suresh as a working professional. He goes to 9 to 5 job, he doesn't have much time, he's married, and then he lives in city. He always wants to play sports. He used to play sports 5 years back, but now he's not actively involved in sports. But if given a chance, he will play sports. So my persona is Suresh. I want to solve for Suresh, and Suresh has these kind of traits which I've talked about, and Suresh fits in the category of sports enthusiast. Make sense? So now what we need to do from here, always consider Suresh in your mind, always consider your goal in your mind which you have set in the first place, and then go on defining the next steps, which are basically your pain points. Make sense? Take some time, digest this thing, and then the next thing we're going to do is defining the pain points. Also, please note that at each step which I'm defining, which are clarification questions, defining a goal, defining a segment, you can take pause. You can take like a minute, 2 minute, 3 minute pause to jot down your thoughts and then come back. Do not fumble. At any point, if you find yourself fumbling and not able to structure your thoughts, take your time, note down, and then talk to the interviewer about the next steps. Make sense? All right. So I think the next thing, once you have defined the customer or the segment which we want to solve for, is pain points. How you can think about pain points and how you can even understand the pain points is think of the user journey of that segment you have prioritized. So let's say I prioritize Suresh, who's a working professional, married, doing 9 to 5 job, busy on weekdays, only free on weekends. What kind of a pain point this kind of a persona would have? So I think if I go into the user journey of Suresh, the kind of pain points we would have is, finding what to play, whether you want to play cricket, whether you want to play badminton, whether you want to play table tennis, etc., etc. The second kind of pain point Suresh as a persona will have is whom to play with, because he's living in a city. Maybe his friends are far, maybe his friends are not living in his area. So whom to play that sport with is also one of the big challenges for Suresh. The third problem could be whether he has, let's say, some kind of a sports equipment which is already there in the market, right? So maybe Suresh wants to play cricket but he doesn't have a bat, or he wants to play badminton but he doesn't have a racket, something like this. So this can also be one of the pain point. The next thing or the next problem which Suresh might have is social validation. So let's say he has played sport but he wants to share with his friends that, hey, you know what, I'm playing sports, I'm enjoying myself, etc., etc., because in this kind of world, social validation is also an important thing which we want to solve. And the next thing is trust, because once you find someone to play with, you need to trust, right? And the next pain point I can think of is whether he's engaging with the players he's finding to play with. So I think if you think on these, the journey of Suresh in order to find something to play and actually playing, this could be the things which could be potentially the pain points of Suresh. So I think here also at this point we have thought, let's say, horizontally, but we need to go vertically and find one pain point to solve for, because you cannot literally solve for everything. You have to choose one pain point as a PM and understand which is that one pain point you would solve first in the MVP, and then post that you can sort of maybe even go about solving other pain points. Make sense? So I think once you have to define or understand that which pain point you want to go to solve for, I would consider sort of two factors on the basis of which I would prioritize these pain points. One, how underserved that problem or that pain point is, and how much of the big market that can address. Maybe there is a pain point which is can address the whole potential target segment which we have in the market in the mind, but that problem is already solved by some other competitor which is there in the market. Or maybe that problem is not big enough, that pain point is not big enough, that pain point is not intense enough. So I think these are the things you need to consider. So I think let's eliminate and choose one of the pain point which you want to solve, and prioritize one. So finding what to play, right? So whether as Suresh I want to Suresh wants to play cricket, or Suresh wants to play badminton, Suresh wants to play table tennis. I think this is something which is not quite intense, because Suresh as a customer would already have some kind of preferences in his mind. So even if we build a product to recommend Suresh something, hey, you know what, you can play this, I don't think it would matter much, because Suresh, based on his preferences or based on his skill set or based on something which he has done in the past, he would know what he want to play, right? So let's eliminate that, because I don't think it's a huge problem to be solved for. It's not an underserved problem. The next thing is, let's say I was mentioning something with respect to finding sports equipment. So this is also something which is, I don't think it's a huge problem to be solved, because one, you can, e-commerce players are there in the market, you can buy the sports equipment, you can rent the sports equipment also with other kind of apps which are there in the market. So, and maybe you can borrow something from your friends or who are coming to play with. Now, if I think about the third problem which I've listed, is basically whom to play with. I think this is quite a big problem to be solved, because once we consider personas like this who wants to play, but they don't, let's say, have the motivation to play, and their frequency is not enough. I think whom to play with is quite a big problem, and it can address the whole market. Maybe it can address the market even beyond sports enthusiasts. It can go to couch potatoes and sports freaks also, to finding the people you want to play with in your, let's say, hyper local area. And also, I think the trust and social validation part is already, social validation is part is already solved. Trust part is something which will be solved once you find something to play with. So I think it comes slightly lower in the funnel. So the top of the funnel problems becomes, let's say, whom to play with. And the engagement with players is also something which we can solve once we actually connect people to play with, right? So now our pain point for Suresh is that Suresh wants to find players whom he can play sports. Now, at this point, once you have prioritized one pain point, always go back to your goal and check and recheck and confirm whether your goal, which you have defined, of connecting people to play sports, is connecting well or is still relevant with respect to the pain point you have chosen. A lot of people do this mistake, is that they define or choose the pain point and their goal is tangentially different. That is a red signal. So what you do need to do at this point, if anything like this happens, is you need to retweak your goal and tell the interviewer specifically correctly that, hey, you know what, I think my goal is slightly different, I've chosen a different pain point, so now at this point I would readjust my goal. Don't ignore that fact that your goal is different from a pain point, because this is clearly a red signal. Make sense? So I think now our pain point is there, that we want to connect people to play sports. And then the biggest problem which we found for the segment which we have chosen is whom to play with. So I think now the next step is to think of some kind of a solutions which you can solve, which can solve this problem. And at this point also, take your time, go easy, and then come up with solutions. And yes, one thing which I've probably forgot to mention is that this round is typically 45 minutes to 1 hour. So you'll get plenty of time to structure your thoughts and take pauses and then come back to the interview. Okay, so I think if I have to think about solving for the pain point of finding whom to play with for Suresh and our goal of connecting people, I can think of some solutions. So I think one of the solutions could be that, hey, you know what, I can build like a Tinder for sports within Facebook. What I mean by this is that I, as a customer or I as an individual, can enter my preferences, the other person can enter their preferences for sports. I can, tell, what kind of a sports partner I'm looking for. Let's say I want to look for something who's interested in badminton, who's of this age, this gender, blah, blah, blah. And the other person also does that. And Facebook, by their matching algorithm, connects as well. So it becomes like a Tinder for sports within Facebook. Makes sense? So I think it can be quite interesting solution for Facebook, which if they want to enter the sports space. The next kind of solution could be that maybe we build like something like a hyperlocal sports network, which is basically connecting people only which are there in their area. So even if you find something who is interested in playing sports with you, but let's say he's hundreds and thousands of kilometers away, it doesn't make sense. So here what basically will happen is that, let's say, a mini Facebook for sports within Facebook, where you have a news feed where people are sharing the events which are happening in the nearby area, People are posting videos, posting pictures, etc., etc. And when people like Suresh watch this, they're already motivated that, hey, you know what, some kind of a sports event is happening near me, why should I not go there? There are people posting pictures, doing yoga, or and some kind of a sports activities. Maybe there are some live classes going on with respect to learning some sport. So I think Hyperlocal Sports Network can be a solution, which is like a Facebook within Facebook, but only for sports related activities, and which can also be solved maybe by groups. But I think a mini because a mini kind of Facebook can also be something which is a Hyperlocal Sports Network can be interesting. I think the other one interesting solution could be like a VR based solution where people are sort of not allowed to meet each other, people are far away from each other. So maybe we connect people and then build some kind of a virtual reality solution where people are far away but they feel that they are together and then they are playing sports together. This is something which will also connect people who want to play sport. And then there can be one solution where we are sort of building like contextual sports events. So let's say Facebook determines that my mood is low and I want to go out and do something. So at that time Facebook understands my emotions, understands where I am, understands if I have equipment, and then they can recommend me some kind of a sports events based on the context I am in. So some kind of contextual sports events. So basis on this, you need to choose one solution. Here also you need to do prioritization at each step. And there, if you have to do prioritization, I would say that my prioritization would be on the basis of two things here. One is the effort to build this solution, and the other thing is the benefit you think, or maybe the if some kind of an alternative solution exists in the market or not. So I think the VR solution is quite interesting. That maybe we connect people virtually in these times of COVID, and then people can feel that to with each other playing sports together. It can connect people more together. But I think the catch with this is that one, it's not fully mature VR as a technology. Second, you are having this constraint of everyone having hardware, because if you don't have a hardware device like Facebook Oculus, you won't be able to scale up this solution. So I think scaling this solution won't be a problem. So I would say the benefit is limited and the effort is also quite more. So I would eliminate this solution right away. Tinder for sports is quite interesting. I don't think it's much effort for Facebook because Facebook dating already exists. We can use the similar algorithm. But in terms of benefit, I would say that Tinder for sports is quite limited because it's connecting only one-to-one people, and sports is an activity which happens in groups, right? So maybe it might not be as beneficial to people because maybe people want to play sports in sports like cricket where two people cannot play. So even if you connect people one-on-one for sports, it might be limited only for sports like, let's say, table tennis or badminton, which are two-player sports, which are probably indoor sports, right? So I think the in terms of scaling up, Tinder for sports won't scale up quite exponentially. So I think, in my opinion, if you think about Hyperlocal Sports Network, this is a solution which can be quite interesting because here you can have like multiple people doing activities together, posting pictures, adding events, adding activities, and this is dedicated to hyperlocal your area. So basically what you're doing essentially is like building a community within your area, and that community is only for sports. And here you can share things, plan events, make postings, etc. So if I am Suresh and I just check my Hyperlocal Sports Network, I would see that, hey, you know what, someone is playing sports at 5:30 p.m. I will join them, something like this. And this will actually make stronger connections, make deeper bonds within people, and actually build like a sense of community within the hyperlocal area. So I think I would pick this solution on the basis of this. The next thing which you need to do, which I would probably skip because of time constraints, I think we are running out of time, is you need to think of, let's say, some kind of a designing of screens, some kind of MVP, maybe one or two key metrics, and some of the trade-offs with your solution. If you do that, you're done. On a highlight, what we did, we picked a abstract space like sports, we clarified questions, we went into horizontals, picked one goal, we defined some segments, prioritized one, we defined their pain points, prioritize one pain point, and we defined some solutions, and here also we prioritize. So at each step we are going narrower and narrower and narrower. So first horizontal, then narrow. So basically we are thinking wide and then going deep. This is the approach which typically works well. It also shows your prioritization skills, and it also helps you identify the right solutions. So if you think about the journey, we started with sports and then we actually ended up building like a hyperlocal sports network because of identifying our goal, identifying the segments correctly, identifying their pain points correctly. The next step is obviously maybe we can cover in the next session, which is basically maybe defining some kind of a trade-offs and some kind of like key metrics for the solution which I've listed. But if you do this, you're 80 to 90% done with respect to showing your thought process to the interviewer for product sense interviews. Cool. So I think we are almost reaching the end of the session. I will define some key takeaways for the session we had. So first, think wide and go deep. Do not jump to solutions. Do not give answers right away. Always list the different options you have and then choose one based on prioritization. Don't go too blind on frameworks. There are a lot of frameworks which are existing in the market. If you do that, they will catch you right away. You can use the frameworks smartly, but don't sound like you have actually, copied and just pasting and force fitting the framework wherever you want to. Make it like a free flow conversation, because in that way it will look more natural to the interviewer. The third thing is that do lots of mock interviews with partners. This is a skill which you'll master over time. This is not something which probably, you maybe if you're awesome at, you'll be awesome at, etc. Anyone can master this skill. Do lots of practice with the past questions asked in Google, Facebook, Uber interviews, and connect with a lot of mock interview partners which you can find in online communities in Slack, etc. And the fourth key takeaway is that you should always defend your rationales well. At each step, you're making some decisions, but once the interviewer asks those decisions, he wants to understand that why you're taking that decision versus those decision. So choose your rationales well and then defend it well if you're asked to. That's it. I think that's from my side. Happy to take that session, and I'm also happy to take any kind of questions and feedback and comments you have. And maybe if you guys are interested, we'll also have a part two of the session. That's it from my side. So thank you guys. Thanks for joining and catch you later. Bye bye.